Welcome to Shadow of Truth with your host, Dave Kranzler from InvestmentResearchDynamics.com and Rory Hall from the Coin.org. And this is part two of our interview with Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. And Dr. Paul Craig Roberts remains unscripted. How would that, I want to ask you about gold-backed currency, Dr. Roberts. How would that affect me as just a regular citizen? What differences would I see in how my personal economy works as far as me going out and making transactions, having money in the bank or mortgage, paying bills and that kind of thing? What should I expect to see if there was in fact a reintroduction of a gold-backed currency?
Rory, I'm not sure. I remember talking to Milton Friedman once, and he pointed out that even when we were on the gold standard, if you have a central bank, they simply offset the movements of gold. And so if gold flows out because you're running a trade deficit, then the central bank just takes steps to increase the money in circulation. If gold flows in, they just sterilize it and don't put it into the money in order to prevent the inflation. So I think when you have a central bank, they can essentially evade the gold standard. I think the reason, you see, money historically was gold and silver. And when paper money was used, it was usually in order to inflate, so the government could pay for stuff that it didn't have any gold or silver to pay for. And so the point of gold and silver was to give some credibility to the paper money that was circulating. Well, you've had so many people for so long now who've never seen bullion coinage that they're just used to paper money. So I don't really know that it does much. I think the main function of gold is, like in the current situation where everybody's printing money hand over fist, it's a way to protect yourself from what historically would have to be a high inflation, a hyperinflation. And so if you have gold as an alternative to fiat money, it still serves to check the central bank, because if people flee the money into gold, then the gold price rises relative to the money. And that has always been a check. But as Dave and I pointed out, now they get around that by operating in the futures market, the shorts. Really, gold can't do anything except protect an individual if the central banks and the governments are not prepared to play by the rules.
They don't play by the rules. They just make them up as they go along.
They're not now playing by them. No, that's right. I've never could have imagined how outside all the rules they are now. I mean, they rig everything in order to keep a house of cards standing. And I don't know how long it can go on. I just don't know what it all means. But clearly there's no integrity. I think that Nomi Prinz and Michael Hudson are right. And that is, a few of these mega banks, which are vast, they've simply taken over everything. Michael Hudson calls it the financialization of the economy, and Nomi calls it bankism. And I think what you've got is just they control central banks, rely on the central banks to make good all their bad bets. And they're continuing to make bad bets. Now, the last time it collapsed, but that's because the central bank wasn't maybe ready. It didn't. It was a new development. The second time, will it collapse? I don't know. Maybe central bank will step in and buy everything again. Or maybe they just won't even bother to report what's on the books. I mean, it's not really clear. When they can falsify the employment reports like they do, they don't have to report what the real balance sheets of the banks are.
Or anything.
So I just don't know. I mean, we may live in this type of situation for a long time, and I just don't know. I couldn't.
I don't see how that's possible, because at some point the amount of money that they need to print to keep everything together becomes way too disconnected from the amount of real wealth output that the economy is producing. So, for instance, as you get more and more people leaving the labor force, a fair percentage of those people become wards of the government. They go on to welfare, they go on to Social Security, disability, and the government has to keep printing more and more money in order to pay for those programs. And at some point, it just collapses under its own weight. I mean, they can defy the laws of economics and nature for a certain period of time, but you can't change them and you can't rewrite them. Eventually, the natural laws of economics and nature get a grip on the system, and that's where you have a collapse.
Well, that could be true, but you know they're cutting everything, and they're talking about privatizing Social Security, and I think too, Dave, what you said really relies on some kind of accounting standards and some kind of integrity somewhere. But if there's not any integrity anywhere, and all that money doesn't get into the economy, it just goes to the bank's balance sheets. But I don't even know, why do they even have to, it doesn't get in the economy. I mean, I don't even know they even print money. They just tell the bank, okay, here's so much on your account, and we have these assets of yours. But I think it reached the point they don't even make the trade. They just say, here's some more money on your account.
Right, but at some point, there's an extent. I mean, I think this country basically, the percent of everything that this country consumes that is imported is like, it's somewhere between 60 and 70%. So in other words, this country only produces about 30 to 35% of what it consumes. At some point, countries are going to stop exporting to us because they're not going to want the dollar because there's been so much of it printed. And that's part of the dynamic of where the system collapses. I mean, if governments
that's what should happen.
And it will happen. I mean, if governments and central banks could rewrite the laws of nature, we would all be speaking Latin right now because we'd still be part of the Roman Empire.
Well, I don't think they knew how to do all this.
Oh no, they debased the money back then. They started shaving the gold and silver coins, and then they started mixing lead and tin.
The way they did it, it was apparent to everybody.
I think it's going to become more apparent to I think it is apparent to a lot of people. It's just you're not hearing about it because they're being kept dumbed down with propaganda and welfare and all the other. I mean, there's over 50% of the country that is now basically dependent on the government for some sort of transfer payment, and that can't be self-sustaining.
I just don't know. We won't have to deal with this today, though.
Dr. Roberts, I completely agree with you about the reserve currency idea. There's not a need for a reserve currency, and if anything, a country's ability to have the reserve currency skews the power structure of the globe.
Yeah, and it puts everything out of balance, like we've done.
It puts everything out of balance, and now we're so far out of balance, there's going to be a very painful adjustment that puts it back into balance. And I would take it one step further and say that we don't need central banks either. And along with that, we need to eliminate the fractional banking system.
Yeah, that's all probably true.
And I think at some point, I don't think I mean, obviously the United States is obviously not going to put those reforms in willingly. But at some point, the market's going to impose the discipline.
Well, if there's still a market there, everything seems to be so rigged and controlled, and there's so much collusion.
It's incredible.
And that's what I mean. I mean, that's not a self-sustaining model.
You're very hopeful.
Who, me?
Dave's very hopeful, yeah.
Oh, no, I'm not hopeful. I was going to say, and I don't know if we want this on the show or not, but my personal view is that, and the history kind of tells us this is where it goes, is that this will end up in a world war before the United States will let that adjustment process take place. And I think that's what we're seeing here with the escalation in United States military provocation all around the world, especially towards Russia and China.
I think that is just a reflection of the neoconservatives' ideology of global hegemony, which of course is backed by the banks and the oil companies and the armament companies. But this is the ideology of the U.S. as the only country able to exercise unilateral action anywhere in the world. And Russia has gotten in the way of that, and they suspect China is going to be in the way of it. So they're trying to figure out how to destabilize those countries. And if they can destabilize them, then they don't need to go to war. So I think you have to take the neoconservative ideology very seriously. And it's an ideology that we are the unipower and there are to be no others. And that's where this war threat comes from. It's a well-developed doctrine.
Remember the story was being promoted that people were going to take their savings from a lower gas price and spend it on the economy?
Yeah.
Well, as it turns out, this report did a survey and it showed that any extra money that people have saved from gasoline has either gone towards the increase in healthcare expenses as a result of Obamacare or to pay down credit card debt, because credit card debt has started to go up over the last couple of years. And so they're using any extra money to try and keep their credit card balances lower.
Yeah, they can barely make the minimum payments.
Right. So much for spending money at restaurants and at Macy's and Saks and
right. I certainly don't believe the Fed's going to raise interest rates, because what would that do to the stock and bond markets?
Well, that was another thing that I just wanted to touch on briefly today, was the fact that you've had, over the last 6 weeks, you've had 4 different regional Fed presidents come out, and it's like they're playing good cop, bad cop by saying, oh, we got to raise interest rates in June because now the economy is improving and the unemployment rate is falling, and we got to get ahead of the curve. And then one of the Fed heads, the Chicago Fed head, which obviously Chicago is in fiscal straits, and it's also feeling the brunt of what's really a recession going on in the country. He said he doesn't want to see rates rise until mid 2016. So you got this good cop, bad cop act going on. But I don't see how they can possibly raise rates without collapsing the entire economy, just because there's so much debt. And the stock market has bubbled up on 0% money that's used to buy stocks.
Yeah. No, if they raise interest rates, it contradicts everything they've been doing since '08. So the whole system is based now on free money, negative interest rates. If they raise them, that goes to the stock market, that goes to the bond market. And it could set off some kind of a panic. I don't know what the implication would be for all the collateral loan obligations and the various derivatives, and all that's over my head. But all these things are got to be tied to interest rates.
They all are. It's all tied to the fact that the banks have free money to plow into financial assets.
Unless the rise in interest rates helps the banks' derivatives, it'll produce a crisis. So maybe they've got it set up. Maybe they're in league with the Fed and they've got it all set up so that they make money if the interest rates go up. Maybe that's how it's set up. I just don't know. But I can't see the Fed raising interest rates that then produce another bank problem.
But if they raise the interest rates, wouldn't that blow up the deficit? I mean, as far as what the federal government.
Not a worry, because the Fed just buys it.
Oh, okay. Well,
and the interest that the Fed gets, they give back to the Treasury.
Oh, okay. So
the interest on the debt is a problem only if it's held by people or companies. But if the Fed holds the debt, they return all the interest to the Treasury except for the operating expenditures.
But what about the debt that China holds, or Russia? What about the debt that China and Russia?
Well, they have to pay interest on that.
Okay. Here's what the problem is with raising interest rates: is the Fed's balance sheet has a very, very small net worth. And if they raise interest rates, it causes the value of their treasury and mortgage security holdings to decline. It would put the Fed in basically technically insolvent.
Yeah, but why does that
give them a negative net worth?
Yeah, but why does that matter? All they would do is say, "Oh, well, we need another $1 trillion here."
Because if you own dollars, your dollar is a liability of the Fed. So, would you want to use money, or would you want to use a piece of paper that you got from a bankrupt entity? Does the piece of paper that a bankrupt entity issues, does it have any value?
I don't think people will ever understand it. And the Fed if it has a net loss on its portfolio, I don't think.
But ultimately, there's going to be economic consequences for that, and especially with countries that are exporting to us, and they're not going to accept the dollar as payment because they're going to say, no, that dollar is issued by the Fed, and the Fed has a negative net worth. Why would I take that dollar?
Well, they already got reasons not to take it, and they are.
But they're also moving away from doing that. It doesn't happen all at once because, like I said, if you do it all at once, you create too big of a shock event.
Dave, they're not moving away from it for the kinds of reasons that we think they should be. They're moving away from it as self-protection because of sanctions against Russia, against Iran, China's alliance.
But China was moving away from the dollar before all those sanctions were put in place. China's been slowly, they've been doing these currency swaps with other countries that allow them to trade in their own respective currencies now for several years. It's becoming more widespread. In other words, China's been doing this. It's been a slow process over several years where China's been phasing this in. They're moving away from the dollar because they know the dollar is a fraudulent piece of paper.
They may be the reason, but I think there are other reasons they could.
Well, there are other reasons. You're right. There's a lot of reasons, but that's one of the primary ones because that's an economic-based reason.
See, I think what we've got now, Dave, is an economy in which there's no economic base for anything. It's all completely rigged. You know, we pointed out so many times, how can the gold price be going down when the demand for physical possession is rising and there are constraints on supply? Don't you remember a while ago?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Everything in this economy is rigged, but, that's all the more reason for why China and Russia would not want U.S. dollars.
Well, I think the reason Russia doesn't want them is because they found out it puts them under our power. We can sanction them. We can block them from the SWIFT system. We can exclude them from the payments mechanisms.
Right. It's a whole, you're right. It's a whole witch's brew of reasons. Not the least of which is the fact that, if you're China or you're Russian, you're looking at the Federal Reserve as the issuer of the U.S. dollar, which is a Federal Reserve note. It's not an actual, it's actually a debt security is really technically what it is. You're looking at that and you're saying, well, the Federal Reserve is on the brink of having a negative net worth. I don't want any paper that they issue, and the paper they issue is the U.S. dollar.
I don't think anybody cares, and all the Fed has to do is just create more dollars to cover the loss.
But if there's not wealth backing those dollars, eventually that catches up. Like I said, I mean, if we could print our way into prosperity, there'd be a lot more dollars in circulation right now, and there wouldn't be welfare, and everyone would be happy.
No, but we're not printing ourselves into prosperity. We're printing the banks into prosperity.
Well, and it's the mechanism, but see, it's the mechanism by which they're sucking wealth away from us, because they're sucking the wealth out of our system, and they're going to leave this entire system one huge shell of just debt.
Yeah, that's when it all collapses.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why China and Russia don't want anything to do with the dollar. But I mean, China's got a problem.
If they're smart enough to know that, you see, the question would be, how come their economists know that and ours don't?
Well, our economy. I mean,
in other words,
we know the answer to that. I mean, the people who are implementing what's going on behind the scenes, they know exactly what's going on, and China knows what's going on. But they've got a problem. They're wearing $1.2 trillion of treasury bonds. And if they were to cause a reset all at once, they would lose the any sort of hope of recovering any amount of money from that 1.2 trillion in treasuries. And that's why I think you're seeing them do this slowly over time, and to try and offset the drop in wealth that will occur when the reset happens. That's why they're accumulating all this gold, because the value of their gold will go up theoretically by the same amount that the value of their treasuries go down. It's a hedge.
Well, they've been printing a lot of money too.
That's true, and I think it's to try and offset.
We're not quite sure how they're
going west.
Gold-backed currency when they keep printing it hand over fist themselves.
Well, but they don't have a gold-backed currency yet. They're accumulating gold, and obviously, well, Russia's accumulating gold also. But while the West is dishoarding its gold, it's all moving to the east, and China's taking most of it. And there's a reason why they're doing that.
Sure there is. The real question is how we can have a situation like this, and it's never mentioned in the financial press. It's not an item of discussion among economists or the universities, that there's just total silence about this situation that we've been discussing. And that is really a mystery. And if you think about the Russians and Chinese, they got the same kind of economists we do. They're all neoliberals. They're all trained in the neoliberal tradition. They think just exactly the way I was do. I wouldn't attribute any kind of inside information, any sort of different knowledge or information to them. They're all, look at the Russian central bank using up its foreign exchange to support the ruble. What's the point of that?
Well, but it's foreign exchange is fiat currencies. They're just using that. They're using fiat to support fiat.
I know,
but they're also accumulating gold.
But the fiat currencies they're using up are not declining in value because we have it rigged. How's the dollar going to decline when we've got Japanese printing and the euro printing?
Well, that's what I'm saying, though. You're still. It's still if you look at the big picture, everything added up. All the currencies added up. It's all paper currencies that are being printed well in excess of the amount of wealth that's being generated by the global economy. In fact, the global economy is contracting right now.
Right.
That's where at some point it becomes unsustainable and it all collapses. Because the currencies are supposed to represent the wealth that's being produced, right? It's just a proxy for trade. I trade my labor for your currency, so I can go out and buy.
Well, this hasn't been the case. This hasn't been the case since 2008. It's now 2015.
Well, it takes a long period of time look how long it took for Rome to collapse. Centuries.
Yeah, but that was a different thing. They basically collapsed militarily by fighting each other all the time. That's why they had to debase the silver denarius. Well, I think we've got a lot to write about in the future, that's for sure. And I think Rory did a good job getting this together. And I'll look forward to seeing it. When are you going to come up with it?
I plan on releasing all of this evening.
Oh, well, you better get to work.
I certainly appreciate all your time today, Dr. Roberts, and I hope that we're able to do this in the not too distant future.
All right, you guys.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Roberts.
So long.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.